A black single dad jokingly told a powerful CEO, "You'd make a beautiful bride." She smiled, looked at him in the eyes, and replied, "Then be my groom." What seemed like a light-hearted exchange became the first step in a journey filled with hidden secrets, impossible choices, and a fight to save a place that meant everything to an entire community. Along the way, an old pocket watch would reveal the truth. A father's promise would be tested, and one simple act of kindness would prove stronger than greed. Stay with me until the very end, because this unforgettable story is about far more than love. It's about the extraordinary things that can be restored when people refuse to give up on each other. Dust floated through the afternoon light inside Riverbend Heritage Center, turning the old hall golden wherever the sun passed through the stained glass windows. Elijah Brooks stood on a short ladder beneath the restored wooden arch, running one careful hand along the final seam. "Hold still, Dad," Maya called from beside his toolbox. "You've got sawdust in your hair." Elijah glanced down at his 10-year-old daughter. "That's not sawdust. That's wisdom." Maya rolled her eyes and closed her fingers around the old pocket watch hanging from a faded chain at her neck. The watch had belonged to her mother. Its hands had not moved in 6 years. Across the hall, Claire Donovan stepped beneath the arch. As Riverbend's new CEO, she usually wore dark suits and carried a folder pressed against her chest like a shield. Today, she had removed her jacket and rolled her sleeves to help arrange tables for the upcoming fundraiser. A pale sheet had been draped behind the arch, so the event photographer could test the lighting. Claire looked up at the carved oak leaves above her. "You finished this by yourself?" "With some supervision," Elijah said, nodding toward Maya. "She ignored most of my advice," Maya replied. Claire laughed. The sound filled the empty hall, warm and unexpected. For one brief moment, with the sunlight around her and the wooden arch framing her face, she looked less like an executive carrying the weight of a failing institution and more like someone standing at the beginning of a different life. Elijah forgot to look away. Claire noticed. "What?" she asked. He climbed down from the ladder, buying himself a few seconds. "Nothing." That didn't look like nothing. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You'd make a beautiful bride." The words escaped before he could stop them. Maya's eyes widened. Claire stood perfectly still beneath the arch. Then she met Elijah's gaze without embarrassment or retreat. "Then be my groom." The wrench in Elijah's hand slipped and struck the wooden floor with a sharp clang. Claire's expression remained calm, but color rose into her cheeks. Maya tightened her grip on the broken watch, watching them both as though she had just heard the answer to a question no one else knew she had been asking. Elijah opened his mouth. He could not tell whether Claire was teasing him, challenging him, or admitting something neither of them was ready to name. Before he could speak, the double doors slammed open. Grant Hollis entered with a leather folder under his arm and 2 board members behind him. His polished shoes clicked across the dusty floor as his eyes moved from Claire beneath the arch to Elijah standing only a few feet away. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Grant said, though his tone suggested the opposite. Claire stepped away from the arch. "What is it?" Grant placed the folder on a nearby table and opened it to a contract, already marked with yellow tabs. "The board has finished reviewing Riverbend's position." He looked around the aging hall as if it were already empty. "You have 3 weeks to prove this place can survive." Claire's face hardened. "And if I can't?" Grant pushed the contract toward her. "Then Riverbend is sold." Silence settled over the hall. The stained glass windows that had seemed so warm only moments earlier now cast long shadows across the worn hardwood floor. Claire rested one hand on the contract, but made no effort to open it. "You're giving us 3 weeks?" she asked. Grant adjusted his cufflinks. 3 weeks to convince the board that this place deserves another dollar. Personally, I think you're wasting everyone's time. His eyes drifted toward Elijah. "See, and I certainly wouldn't be relying on a local carpenter to save a multi-million-dollar property." Elijah didn't answer. He simply picked up the wrench he had dropped, brushed the dust from it, and quietly closed his toolbox. Maya noticed his jaw tighten. She had seen that look before, the one that appeared whenever someone underestimated her father. He never argued. He simply became quieter. Claire folded the contract. "I accepted this position because I believe Riverbend still matters." Grant gave a thin smile. "Belief doesn't pay utility bills." Without another word, he turned and walked out with the other board members following behind him. The heavy doors echoed shut. For several seconds, no one moved. Finally, Claire exhaled. "I guess that's today's good news." Elijah looked at her, surprised. "Good news?" "They didn't vote to sell it today." Despite everything, Elijah laughed. "So that's optimism?" "It's survival." The smile lingered between them for only a moment before Maya tugged gently on her father's sleeve. "Dad, it's almost 4. He checked his watch. She was right. Every weekday at 4:30 they stopped whatever they were doing, no matter how important it seemed. It was the promise he had made after losing his wife, that Maya would never wonder whether her father was coming home. He looked apologetically toward Claire. "I should go." "You're leaving?" "I always do." Claire frowned. "We still have measurements to finish." "They'll still be here tomorrow." She looked puzzled. He smiled gently. "My daughter won't be 10 forever." Claire watched Maya slip her small hand into Elijah's. For reasons she couldn't explain, that simple gesture stayed with her longer than anything else that had happened that afternoon. The apartment behind Elijah's workshop was barely large enough for 2 people. The kitchen table doubled as Maya's homework desk. The couch had been repaired so many times that the fabric no longer matched. A stack of unpaid invoices sat beneath a bowl of fresh apples Elijah had picked up on sale that morning. Maya emptied her backpack. "How much do we owe this month?" Elijah looked up from preparing dinner. "You're too young to worry about bills." "You always say that." "And I always mean it." She wasn't convinced. While Elijah stirred a pot of vegetable soup, Maya quietly noticed another envelope marked "past due" tucked beneath the others. She pretended not to see it. After dinner, Elijah opened the small wooden box he kept on the bookshelf. Inside rested several tiny keepsakes from his wife: an old recipe card, a faded photograph, and the broken pocket watch Maya wore every day. She carefully unclipped it from her necklace and placed it into his hand. "Can you fix it now?" Elijah turned the watch over in his palm. The cracked crystal reflected the kitchen light. "Not yet." "You always say that." He smiled sadly. "When I'm ready." Maya leaned against his shoulder. "I think Mom would have liked Miss Claire." His fingers froze around the watch. After a long silence, he slipped it back into Maya's hand. "Finish your homework, sweetheart." She nodded, though she knew he hadn't answered her question. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the workshop windows. Inside, Elijah unfolded tomorrow's schedule. Halfway down the page sat a voicemail notification from his largest commercial client. He pressed play. "Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry. We've decided to cancel the restoration contract. Circumstances have changed. The message ended. No explanation, no second chance. Only the sound of rain filling the room as Elijah quietly lowered the phone. 3 weeks. Riverbend needed 3 weeks to survive. His workshop might not even have 3 days. Elijah lowered the phone and stared through the rain-speckled window toward the dark outline of his workshop. The canceled contract represented nearly half of his income for the month. Without it, paying the overdue rent would become more than difficult. It would become impossible. The next morning, Louisville woke beneath gray skies. Maya climbed off the school bus in front of Riverbend instead of heading home. She loved wandering through the old building after classes, listening to stories about families who had once filled its halls with weddings, concerts, and community gatherings. Inside the conference room upstairs, Claire faced 8 members of the board. Grant Hollis remained standing. He preferred standing when delivering bad news. "It isn't personal," he said, sliding a financial report across the polished table. "The numbers simply don't work." Claire flipped through page after page of declining donations, rising maintenance costs, and repair estimates that seemed almost impossible to overcome. "If we cancel the fundraiser," she said quietly, "we'll never know whether this community still believes in Riverbend." Grant folded his arms. "The community doesn't write million-dollar checks." One board member nodded. Another avoided Claire's eyes. Grant reached into his briefcase and removed a glossy presentation showing architectural renderings of luxury apartments overlooking the river. "This offer expires in 21 days. Claire looked toward the rain-streaked windows. "Or the building gets a second chance." Grant sighed. "You were hired to make difficult decisions, not emotional ones." Just then, movement outside the conference room caught everyone's attention. Elijah and Maya were carrying freshly restored display cabinets into the main gallery. Grant watched through the glass. "There." He pointed toward Elijah. "That's exactly what worries me." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" "A local woodworker who's convinced you this building has sentimental value." "He never said that." "He didn't have to." Grant's voice sharpened. "You're letting a carpenter influence decisions involving millions of dollars." Downstairs, Elijah adjusted one cabinet until it sat perfectly level. Maya smiled. "It looks brand new." "It looks loved," Elijah corrected. Before she could answer, Claire entered the gallery carrying several folders. "I was hoping you hadn't left yet." Elijah immediately noticed the strain on her face. The meeting didn't go well. "No." She looked around the quiet room. "They think Riverbend belongs in the past." Elijah rested a hand on the polished cabinet. "So did the people who owned this." Claire looked at him. "It was headed for the landfill." "And now?" He stepped aside. The cabinet reflected the afternoon light across its newly restored oak surface. "Now someone else gets another generation of memories." Claire stood silently for a long moment. She wasn't looking at the cabinet anymore. She was looking at Elijah. Behind them, Grant appeared at the entrance. His expression carried none of Claire's uncertainty. He spoke loudly enough for nearby volunteers to hear. "Mr. Brooks." Elijah turned. "I appreciate your craftsmanship." There was a brief pause. But let's not confuse restoring furniture with saving a multi-million-dollar institution." Several volunteers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Maya looked down at the floor. Claire's eyes narrowed. Grant continued without lowering his voice. "Riverbend's future will be decided by professionals, not neighborhood carpenters." The room fell completely silent. Elijah neither argued nor defended himself. He simply smiled politely. I hope whoever decides its future loves this place as much as the people who built it. Grant offered no reply. He walked away. Claire watched him disappear down the hallway before turning back toward Elijah. For the first time since accepting the job as CEO, she realized something unexpected. The strongest person inside Riverbend wasn't sitting around the boardroom table. He was standing quietly beside a display cabinet, refusing to let another person's contempt steal his dignity. Claire watched Elijah gather his tools as though Grant's words had never landed. He checked each cabinet one last time, brushed away a few curls of sawdust, then smiled at Maya. Ready to head home? Before Maya could answer, the front door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped inside, struggling to carry something wrapped in an old quilt. Her silver hair was damp from the drizzle outside, and every few steps she stopped to catch her breath. I'm sorry, she said softly. Is this where they restore old things? Claire hurried over. It is. Let me help you. Together they lowered the bundle onto a work table. When Claire folded back the blanket, everyone fell silent. It was a wooden rocking chair. One arm had been burned nearly black, one runner was split in half, and the seat had collapsed inward. Smoke still lingered faintly in the cracked wood. My name is Ruth Coleman, the woman whispered. This was my husband's chair. Her fingers rested gently on the scarred armrest. Our house caught fire last winter. She paused, searching for the strength to continue. He didn't make it out. No one spoke. I saved this, she said. It's all I have left that still remembers him. Claire examined the damage. The restoration budget had already been frozen. She knew the answer before she asked. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Coleman. We don't have funding for private restorations right now. Ruth nodded. I understand. She began folding the blanket back over the chair. I just thought I'd ask. Elijah stepped forward. May I? She looked at him. He ran his fingertips across the burned grain as gently as if he were greeting an old friend. The fire took a lot, he said quietly. But not everything. Ruth looked up with cautious hope. Can it be saved? Elijah studied his broken joints for another moment. Yes. Tears gathered in her eyes. I can't afford very much. He smiled. I didn't ask how much you could afford. Claire looked at him. Elijah. He turned toward her before she could finish. This one isn't for Riverbend. It's still work. I know. And you're already losing contracts. He simply shrugged. Some jobs pay with money. He carefully lifted the chair into the back of his pickup truck. This one pays another way. The workshop lights were still glowing long after sunset. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Elijah carefully removed the burned wood one damaged piece at a time. Maya sat on the floor beside him with a sheet of fine sandpaper. You know this isn't helping us pay rent, she said gently. I know. So why are we doing it? He paused before answering. Because somewhere tonight, he held up one of the cracked wooden runners. There's a woman trying to remember how her husband sounded when this chair rocked across the floor. Maya smiled faintly. Without another word, she picked up another piece and began sanding beside him. Hours later, Claire quietly stepped into the workshop carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had expected to find darkness. Instead, she found a father and daughter sitting beneath warm shop lights, covered in sawdust, patiently giving a stranger's memory another chance to survive. Her eyes drifted toward Elijah's workbench. There was no invoice, no estimate, No customer file. Only careful hands rebuilding something everyone else had already declared beyond saving. Claire suddenly understood. The finest thing Elijah restored wasn't wood. It was hope. The next morning, as Ruth returned to check on the chair, her eyes stopped on a small carving hidden beneath one repaired armrest. She reached out with trembling fingers. "I've seen this mark before." She slowly lifted her gaze to Elijah. "Why would a craftsman like you be hiding in a little neighborhood workshop?" The workshop fell quiet except for the slow ticking of rain against the windows. Elijah's hands paused above the rocking chair. For a moment, he looked not like a carpenter, but like a man who had spent years learning how to bury an old life. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he said gently. Ruth smiled. "No." She turned the chair slightly and pointed beneath the repaired armrest. "What are you there?" Carved into the oak was a tiny cedar leaf enclosed in a circle. "I've seen that mark before." Claire stepped closer. "What is it?" Before Ruth could answer, another voice came from the open workshop door. It was his signature. Everyone turned. A tall man in his 60s stood outside holding a leather portfolio. His gray coat was still damp from the morning rain. Claire recognized him immediately. Malcolm Pierce. The nationally respected preservation architect extended his hand toward Elijah. "It's been a long time." Elijah hesitated before shaking it. "Long enough." Malcolm's eyes wandered around the modest workshop. Stacks of reclaimed lumber, second-hand tools, a leaking roof patched with plastic sheeting. Then he looked back at the beautifully restored rocking chair. "I knew this was your work before I even walked inside." Claire looked between the two men. "You know each other?" Malcolm nodded. "I've spent 35 years restoring historic buildings." He smiled faintly. "And for nearly 10 of those years, the finest restoration foreman I ever worked with was Elijah Brooks." Claire stared at Elijah in disbelief. "You never told me." "I wasn't asked." Malcolm laughed softly. "That's Elijah." He opened his portfolio and removed several photographs. One showed a century-old train station with its soaring timber ceiling. Another captured an ornate theater lobby glowing beneath restored chandeliers. A third displayed Elijah standing with a construction crew beneath a banner celebrating a National Preservation Award. Claire examined the photographs one by one. "These are all yours?" "They belonged to a lot of people," Elijah answered. "I just helped put them back together." Malcolm folded his arms. "You're being modest." He looked directly at Claire. "The interlocking timber joint inside Riverbend's entrance arch?" Claire nodded. "I've never seen anyone else cut them by hand." He smiled toward Elijah. "Because he designed the technique." Even Maya looked surprised. "You invented it, Dad?" Elijah scratched the back of his neck. "I improved an old method." Malcolm chuckled. "He also trained dozens of restoration specialists who still use it today." Claire struggled to reconcile the quiet man she had come to know with the respected craftsman standing in the photographs. "If you accomplished all of this," she hesitated, "why leave?" The question lingered in the room. Elijah rested both hands on the rocking chair. His voice became almost a whisper. "The year my wife died." He glanced toward Maya. "I was spending more nights in hotels than at home." Maya lowered her eyes. "I kept telling myself one more project would make life easier." He smiled sadly. "But children don't remember the buildings you save. They remember whether you came home." No one spoke. "I missed too many dinners." His fingers traced the smooth wood beneath his palm. I wasn't going to miss her childhood, too. Claire felt her throat tighten. For the first time, she understood that Elijah had never walked away because he failed. He had walked away because someone else mattered more than success. As Malcolm prepared to leave, his expression suddenly changed. There is something else you should know. He looked toward Claire. When I inspected Riverbend's west wing yesterday, he paused. The damage didn't look natural. Claire frowned. What do you mean? I've inspected neglected buildings my entire career. He slowly closed his portfolio. And some of those maintenance failures, his eyes narrowed, look less like neglect and more like someone made sure they were never repaired. The words followed Claire all the way back to Riverbend. She spent the drive replaying Malcolm's expression. It wasn't speculation. It was the quiet certainty of a man who had spent decades reading the stories hidden inside old buildings. The next morning, the board gathered again. Grant Hollis arrived early, greeting everyone with practiced confidence. By the time Claire entered the conference room, every folder had already been placed neatly at each seat. Let's begin, Grant said. Claire remained standing. Before we discuss selling Riverbend, I'd like another engineering review. Grant didn't even look surprised. Based on what? A professional concern. A professional whose name wouldn't happen to be Elijah Brooks? Several board members exchanged glances. Claire answered calmly. Malcolm Pierce. Grant smiled. I've already read Mr. Pierce's preliminary notes. You have? They're inconclusive. He slid another folder toward the board. What isn't inconclusive is the financial reality. He began listing repair costs, insurance increases, and declining donations with practiced precision. Every number sounded reasonable. Every conclusion pointed toward selling Riverbend. Claire listened without interrupting. When the meeting finally ended, she walked downstairs feeling as though she were fighting numbers instead of people. Later that evening, volunteers gathered in Riverbend's community kitchen to prepare meals for the upcoming fundraiser. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the room. Maya stood on a stool carefully arranging cookies onto serving trays, while Elijah repaired loose legs on folding tables nearby. Claire rolled up her sleeves and joined the volunteers without ceremony. For the first time in days, the building felt alive. Laughter echoed through the kitchen. Someone turned on an old radio. Even Elijah smiled more than he had all week. Claire carried 2 bowls of soup toward one of the tables. You missed lunch again, Elijah noticed. So did you. I had work. So did I. Their eyes met. Neither one argued. Instead, they quietly shared the meal while Maya chatted with the volunteers about school and the upcoming fundraiser. A local newspaper photographer happened to stop by to collect a few pictures for a community events column. Mind if I grab one? He asked. Claire nodded. The photographer captured a simple moment. The CEO, a carpenter, and his daughter eating dinner together beneath the warm lights of Riverbend's old kitchen. None of them thought much about it. Grant did. The following afternoon, printed copies of the newspaper appeared throughout the building. The headline praised Riverbend's volunteers. But the photograph told a different story. Grant carried one copy into the boardroom. He placed it silently in the center of the table. There it is. A board member frowned. What? Our CEO. He tapped the photograph. Having family dinners with a contractor who's advising major restoration decisions. Another member shifted uncomfortably. They could simply be friends. Grant leaned back. Or perhaps emotions are beginning to replace judgment. Word spread quickly through the building. By late afternoon, whispers followed Claire wherever she walked. Elijah noticed volunteers lowering their voices when he entered a room. He noticed conversations stopping altogether. That evening, he knocked softly on Claire's office door. She was still reading reports under the glow of a single desk lamp. "I think I should step away from the project." Claire looked up immediately. "What? If I'm giving Grant another reason to attack you, you're not. He'll keep using me." Claire stood. No. She walked around the desk until they stood only a few feet apart. "I don't need someone to rescue me, Elijah." He remained silent. "I need someone who stays when things become difficult." The room grew very quiet. Outside the office door, Maya had come looking for her father. She heard every word. A slow smile spread across her face. She looked down at the old pocket watch resting against her sweater. Maybe, just maybe. Claire hadn't been joking beneath that wooden arch, after all. Neither she nor the three adults noticed a man standing farther down the hallway. Grant lowered his phone after taking one final photograph. Then he smiled to himself and quietly walked away. By sunrise, the rumor had already reached half the board. No one accused Claire directly. They didn't have to. Questions replaced trust. Side conversations replaced open meetings. Every glance seemed to carry the same silent suggestion that perhaps the CEO had become too emotionally involved with the quiet carpenter restoring their beloved building. Claire refused to respond. Instead, she spent the morning reviewing decades of maintenance records in Riverbend's dusty archives. Something felt wrong. Invoices disappeared for entire years. Inspection reports ended abruptly. Repair requests had signatures, but no approvals. The paper trail looked less like poor bookkeeping and more like someone had carefully erased pieces of the building's history. Across town, Elijah was finishing Ruth Coleman's rocking chair. The final coat of oil brought the walnut grain back to life. The burn marks remained visible if someone looked closely. He had intentionally left them. "They're part of its story," he told Maya. She nodded. "You always leave one scar. Only the honest ones." She smiled. Just then, the old pocket watch slipped from beneath her sweater and struck the edge of the workbench. The tiny case popped open. A faint metallic click echoed through the shop. "Dad!" Maya froze. It opened. For years, the watch had remained sealed. Even Elijah had never forced it open, afraid of damaging the last thing his wife had treasured. Carefully, he picked it up. The cracked crystal had shifted just enough for a hidden inner cover to spring loose. Behind the faded clock face rested a folded piece of yellowed paper. His hands trembled. He unfolded it with extraordinary care. Inside was a tiny handwritten sketch. Not a letter, not a message, a drawing. Claire would have recognized it instantly. It was Riverbend. More precisely, it was the original architectural drawing of the grand entrance arch. Several beams had been circled in red pencil. Beside them, Elijah's late wife had written only 6 words. "Look where the cedar joins first." Maya looked up. "What does it mean?" Elijah stared at the drawing. "I don't know." But somewhere deep inside, a memory stirred. He had heard those exact words years ago from an elderly master craftsman while learning traditional timber framing. They weren't directions. They were a clue. That afternoon, Claire arrived carrying another box of archived documents. "I found missing maintenance files," she said. "They stopped making sense after Grant joined the board." Elijah spread the old sketch across his workbench. Claire leaned closer. Where did you get this? He held up the pocket watch. It was hidden inside. She studied the faded drawing. This isn't just an illustration. Her finger traced one of the marked joints. These are original construction notes. Elijah's heartbeat quickened. If the original builders marked these locations, they wanted future restorers to find something. Neither of them noticed Malcolm Pierce quietly entering the workshop. He took one look at the drawing and immediately stopped walking. I haven't seen one of these in 30 years. Claire turned. You know what it is? Malcolm nodded slowly. The old Preservation Guild sometimes hid documentation inside major structures. He looked directly at Elijah. If this sketch survived, his voice became almost a whisper, then Riverbend itself may still be hiding the proof of everything. Silence filled the workshop. Outside, thunder rolled across the Kentucky sky. Inside, Elijah carefully folded the fragile drawing and returned it to the pocket watch. For years, he had believed the watch carried only memories of his wife. Now he realized she had been protecting a secret all along. A secret someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep buried inside Riverbend. The storm arrived just after sunset. Rain hammered against Riverbend's stained glass windows while flashes of lightning illuminated the century-old beams above the grand entrance hall. Claire locked the front doors behind them. Only 4 people remained inside this building: Elijah, Claire, Malcolm Pierce, and Maya, who sat quietly reading in the corner with Ruth Coleman's restored rocking chair gently swaying beneath her. Malcolm unfolded the fragile sketch across a long oak table. The note says, "Look where the cedar joins first." He traced the hand-drawn entrance arch. Original master builders often hid records inside the first structural joint completed during construction. Claire looked upward. So we're looking inside the entrance arch. Exactly. Elijah climbed the scaffold with practiced confidence. The familiar scent of aged cedar greeted him as his fingertips explored every timber joint. He moved slowly, patiently, not searching for damage, searching for intention. "Over here," he called softly. "There are tool marks." Malcolm climbed halfway up the scaffold. "Modern?" Elijah shook his head. "No." He brushed away decades of dust. Hand-cut. His fingers stopped at a cedar peg that appeared almost identical to every other fastening pin. Almost. This one was installed from the opposite direction. Claire looked up. "Can you remove it?" "Only if whoever built this wanted it removed." He carefully tapped the peg with a small wooden mallet. Nothing happened. He tried again. The peg slid forward barely half an inch. A hollow sound echoed inside the massive beam. Everyone froze. Malcolm smiled. "That's not solid timber." Working together, they slowly eased the peg free. A narrow wooden panel shifted open, revealing a hidden compartment no wider than a man's hand. Inside rested a weathered brass cylinder wrapped in waxed cloth. Claire's heartbeat quickened. It really exists. Elijah gently lowered the cylinder. The seal had never been broken. Malcolm carefully unscrewed the cap. Inside lay several rolled documents tied with faded blue ribbon. The oldest sheet contained handwritten construction notes, signed by Riverbend's original architect. Another detailed repairs completed nearly 70 years earlier. Then Claire unfolded the final document. Her expression changed immediately. "What is it?" Elijah asked. She silently handed him the page. It was a maintenance authorization ledger. Every major structural inspection, every repair recommendation, every delayed project, every signature. Elijah scanned the final pages. Near the bottom appeared a familiar name, Grant Hollis. Next to multiple urgent repair requests was the same handwritten instruction. Deferred. Again. Deferred. Again. Deferred until further notice. Malcolm slowly removed his glasses. This wasn't neglect. Claire kept turning pages. Each delay increased future repair costs. Each postponed project weakened Riverbend's financial position. Every decision benefited only one outcome: selling the property. A heavy silence settled across the hall. Finally, Elijah spoke. He didn't inherit a failing building. Claire finished the sentence. He helped create one. Before anyone could say another word, footsteps echoed somewhere downstairs. Not volunteer footsteps, not security. Someone else was inside Riverbend. The four exchanged uneasy glances. The building had been locked an hour earlier. Another floorboard creaked. Closer this time. The lights flickered as thunder rolled overhead. Then, from somewhere deep inside the darkened hallway, came the unmistakable sound of a key turning in an old wooden door. Someone was searching the building. And judging by the hidden compartment they had just uncovered, they were already too late. The hallway fell silent again. No one moved. Rain pounded against the roof while the old building groaned beneath another clap of thunder. Elijah quietly rolled the documents back into the brass cylinder. Claire. She looked at him. Take these. What about you? If someone came looking for them, they shouldn't find them all in one place. Without another word, Claire slipped the documents into her satchel. Malcolm reached for a heavy flashlight resting against the wall. I'll check the east corridor. I'll go with you, Claire whispered. Elijah shook his head. No. His voice remained calm. We stay together. Maya climbed down from Ruth's restored rocking chair and instinctively reached for her father's hand. He squeezed it gently. You stay behind me. The group descended the staircase one careful step at a time. Each wooden tread creaked beneath their weight. The beam of Malcolm's flashlight swept slowly across framed photographs, faded portraits, and display cases lining the corridor. Then they heard it again. A cabinet door closing. Someone was definitely inside. Elijah raised one hand, signaling everyone to stop. The sound came from the archive room. He stepped forward and slowly pushed the door open. The room was empty. Only scattered papers covered the floor. One file cabinet drawer remained fully extended. Claire hurried toward it. They've been searching. Malcolm examined the lock. No signs of forced entry. Which means... Claire looked toward the hallway. They had a key. Just then, a back door slammed shut somewhere beyond the kitchen. By the time they reached it, the rain had swallowed whoever had fled into the darkness. Only muddy footprints remained on the old stone walkway. Elijah knelt beside them. They're fresh. Malcolm pointed toward a tire track disappearing into the parking lot. A black SUV. Claire stared into the storm. They knew exactly where to look. The following morning, Riverbend's fundraiser committee gathered before sunrise. Volunteers decorated tables, florists arranged fresh flowers, musicians rehearsed softly beneath the restored archway. For the first time in weeks, the building felt hopeful again, until Grant arrived. He entered carrying a folder beneath one arm. I have unfortunate news. The room quieted. Grant placed several enlarged photographs onto the registration table. Claire's face immediately went pale. One photograph showed her sharing dinner with Elijah. Another showed them standing alone inside her office. A third captured them leaving the workshop together after dark. Grant folded his hands. As members of the board, we must avoid even the appearance of favoritism. Helen Price, Riverbend's finance director, frowned. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that our CEO may have compromised her professional judgment. Several volunteers looked toward Elijah. He remained perfectly still. Claire stepped forward. Those photographs prove nothing. Grant nodded pleasantly. Perhaps. He turned toward the board members gathering for the morning meeting. But perception often matters more than proof. A murmur spread through the room. Claire could almost feel public confidence slipping away. Grant had not attacked the documents. He had attacked her credibility. Then Ruth Coleman slowly stood from the front row. She leaned on the beautifully restored rocking chair Elijah had repaired only days before. Her voice was soft, yet every person in the room heard her. I've lived in Louisville for 82 years. She looked directly at the board. I've learned something. When a person has no evidence, she gently rested her hand on the restored chair. They usually start attacking character instead. Silence swept across Riverbend. Grant's smile faded for the first time. Before anyone could respond, a volunteer hurried through the front doors carrying an overnight delivery envelope. It's for Mrs. Donovan. Claire accepted it. There was no return address. Inside rested a single flash drive. Attached to it was one handwritten sentence. If you want to know who really destroyed Riverbend, play this before tonight's board vote. Every eye in the room turned toward the tiny black drive resting in Claire's hand. Whatever it contained, someone had risked everything to make sure it reached her. Claire carried the flash drive into her office and locked the door. Elijah, Malcolm, Helen Price, and Maya gathered quietly behind her. No one spoke. Claire inserted the drive into her laptop. For several seconds, the screen remained black. Then a folder appeared. Riverbend Internal Records. Inside were scanned emails, financial spreadsheets, contractor invoices, and dozens of time-stamped messages spanning nearly 5 years. Helen leaned closer. These came directly from our internal server. Malcolm opened the first document. It was a maintenance request for severe water damage in the West Wing. Across the bottom was Grant Hollis's approval note. Delay repairs until next fiscal review. The second document carried the same instruction. Then another, and another. Every delay allowed the damage to spread. Every postponed repair increased the restoration estimate. Every growing expense made selling Riverbend appear more reasonable. Helen's face slowly lost its color. I signed some of these payment reports. She looked up in disbelief. They were altered after they left my office. Claire opened an audio file. A familiar voice filled the room. Grant, don't fix the roof yet. A second voice answered nervously. But the engineer says the beams could deteriorate. Grant chuckled. Exactly. A long pause followed. The worse the numbers, the easier the board will approve redevelopment. No one moved. The recording continued. We're not destroying the building, Grant said calmly. We're simply allowing time to do the work for us. The room fell silent. Maya looked toward her father. Does that mean? Elijah nodded slowly. He chose money over history. Helen closed her eyes. I trusted him. Claire removed the flash drive. No. She looked around the room. He counted on everyone trusting him. That evening, Riverbend filled with guests for the emergency board meeting. Community leaders, volunteers, local donors, neighbors who had celebrated weddings, graduations, and anniversaries beneath the old cedar beams. The atmosphere carried equal parts hope and uncertainty. Grant stood confidently near the front of the room. He had already prepared copies of the redevelopment proposal. The vote, he believed, was only minutes away. Claire stepped onto the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she paused. "Before we vote, there is something everyone deserves to hear." Grant smiled politely. "Claire, I don't believe this is on today's agenda." She met his eyes. "It is now." The projector came alive. The first screen displayed the maintenance ledger recovered from inside the hidden compartment. Gasps spread across the audience. The second screen showed the deferred repair authorizations. Grant's smile began to disappear. Then Claire played the recording. His own voice echoed through the hall. "The worse the numbers look, the easier the board will approve redevelopment." Absolute silence. No one even shifted in their seats. Grant stood frozen. Finally, he laughed once. "It's edited." Helen slowly rose from her chair. "No." She held up several original accounting records. "I verified the files myself." Malcolm stepped beside her. "So did I." One by one, board members turned toward Grant. The confidence that had followed him for years disappeared in a matter of seconds. Yet even then, Grant made one final attempt. He pointed directly at Elijah. "This was all orchestrated." His voice rose. "That carpenter manipulated every one of you." The audience instinctively looked toward Elijah. He remained exactly where he had stood all evening. Quiet, calm, without anger, without triumph. He simply looked at Grant with genuine sadness. "I never wanted your position." He spoke softly enough that the room leaned forward to hear. "I only wanted this place to have another tomorrow." The hall became completely still. For the first time, everyone understood the difference between a man fighting to own a building and a man fighting to preserve its soul. The board chair slowly stood. He looked first at Grant, then at the evidence spread across the stage. Finally, he picked up the ceremonial gavel. "The board will now vote." No one in the room could predict how history would remember the next 5 minutes. But everyone understood. Riverbend's future would never be the same again. The chairman looked around the crowded hall. "For years," he said quietly, "we were told this building was failing because time had caught up with it." He paused, letting the silence settle. "It appears time wasn't the problem." One by one, the board members marked their ballots. No speeches, no arguments, only the quiet scratch of pens across paper. Grant remained standing with his hands folded behind his back, forcing himself to appear calm. Claire watched him without satisfaction. She had never wanted to defeat him. She had only wanted the truth to survive. The chairman counted the votes twice. Then he raised his eyes. "The motion to sell Riverbend Heritage Center." He took a slow breath. "Is denied." Applause erupted throughout the hall. Volunteers embraced one another. Several longtime donors wiped tears from their eyes. Ruth Coleman quietly closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Grant's shoulders finally sagged. For the first time since anyone had known him, he looked like an ordinary man instead of the confident board member who always controlled the room. The chairman continued, "Effective immediately, Grant Hollis is removed from the board of directors pending the outcome of an independent investigation." 2 security officers stepped forward. Grant looked at Elijah one last time. You think you've won? Elijah shook his head gently. This was never about winning. Grant gave a bitter laugh. You could have taken everything from me. I didn't want what was yours. Elijah's voice remained steady. I wanted Riverbend to keep what already belonged to the community. Grant said nothing more. He quietly walked toward the exit. No one applauded his departure. No one celebrated it. The heavy doors closed behind him with a soft thud. The building felt lighter. Over the following week, donations began arriving from across Louisville. The newspaper published the full story of Riverbend's rescue. Volunteers doubled. Former patrons returned carrying family photographs, heirlooms, and handwritten memories they wanted preserved alongside the building itself. For the first time in years, every room echoed with laughter instead of uncertainty. Helen Price approached Claire with a thick folder. We're financially stable again. Claire smiled. Not because of one donor. Helen nodded. Because an entire community remembered why this place mattered. Across the hall, Maya gently rocked back and forth in Ruth Coleman's restored chair, while Ruth laughed beside her. My husband would have loved seeing children enjoy it again. Elijah smiled from across the room. The chair had finally come home. Claire walked toward him. I have something to ask. He set down his tools. The board wants to create a permanent director of restoration. She hesitated. They asked if you'd accept. Elijah looked around the hall. Children running beneath the cedar beams, volunteers arranging flowers, neighbors greeting one another like old friends. Then he looked at Maya. What are the hours? Claire laughed. That was your first question? It matters. She nodded. They're flexible. No overnight travel? No. No missing birthdays? Never. He smiled. Oh, then I'd be honored. Maya threw her arms around him before he could finish the sentence. I knew you'd say yes. Claire laughed with her. Watching them together, she realized success no longer looked like corner offices or impressive titles. Sometimes success looked like a father keeping a promise. As the celebration continued around them, Elijah quietly reached into his jacket pocket and removed the old broken pocket watch. He turned it over thoughtfully. The hidden drawing had revealed its secret. But the watch itself still refused to tick. Claire noticed it resting in his palm. Still broken? Elijah smiled softly. Not for much longer. He closed his fingers around it. Some things, he glanced toward Maya, are worth taking your time to restore. 3 weeks had changed everything. The hall that had once echoed with uncertainty now shimmered beneath warm evening lights. Fresh flowers lined the windows. Children's laughter drifted through the restored corridors. Volunteers welcomed visitors as if they were inviting family into their own home. Riverbend wasn't merely open again. It was alive. Near the entrance arch, Elijah sat alone at his workbench. The old pocket watch rested on a folded cloth beneath a bright desk lamp. Every tiny gear had been cleaned. Every worn spring had been carefully polished. The cracked crystal had been replaced, but Elijah had kept the weathered brass case untouched. Some scars deserved to remain visible. Claire quietly walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought I'd find you here. He smiled. You usually do. She handed him 1 cup before looking at the tiny collection of watch parts spread across the table. It looks impossible. It did. He carefully lowered the final balance wheel into place. The movement hesitated. For 1 long second. Nothing happened. Then, tick. Another. Tick. The watch began keeping time once again. Maya, who had been helping volunteers decorate the ballroom, heard the sound and ran across the hall. "It works!" Elijah gently placed the watch into her hands. "It always belonged to you." She hugged him tightly. "It feels like Mom is here." He kissed the top of her head. "In a way." He looked around Riverbend. "I think she is." Across the room, Ruth Coleman slowly settled into her restored rocking chair. It rocked smoothly across the old wooden floor, carrying memories that no longer hurt quite as much. Malcolm Pierce smiled as volunteers admired the restored entrance arch. Helen Price announced that donations had exceeded every expectation. The future of Riverbend was finally secure. As the celebration settled into comfortable conversation, Claire asked Elijah to step beneath the cedar arch. The same arch where everything had begun. Only this time, there was no uncertainty hanging between them. Only quiet gratitude. Claire looked up at the restored beams. "You remember what you said the first day?" Elijah laughed softly. "I've been trying to forget." "You told me," she smiled, "I'd make a beautiful bride." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I probably shouldn't have said that." "No." She took one small step closer. "I'm glad you did." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The soft ticking of the repaired watch seemed louder than the conversations filling the hall. Claire finally broke the silence. "I never answered you properly." He looked at her. She smiled with the same warmth that had stopped him beneath this very arch 3 weeks earlier. "Then be my groom." Elijah stared at her. Not because he was surprised, because he finally believed she meant it. Before he could find the right words, Maya laughed. "I've been waiting for somebody to say that again." The entire room burst into gentle laughter. Even Elijah couldn't stop smiling. He reached for Claire's hand. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like." She squeezed his hand. "It doesn't have to. We'll build it together." The guests applauded, not because they had witnessed a grand proposal, but because they had watched two people choose kindness long before they chose each other. Outside, the evening sun settled behind the Kentucky skyline. Inside, the restored pocket watch continued to tick steadily beside Maya. Time had not erased loss. It had simply given healing enough time to find its way home. And beneath the cedar arch that had survived storms, betrayal, and the passing of generations, a black single dad discovered that the greatest restoration of his life had never been an old building. It had been hope, family, and the courage to open his heart once more. When Elijah finally heard the old pocket watch begin to tick again beneath the same cedar arch where Claire smiled and said, "Then be my groom," it wasn't just time that had been restored. It was a promise, a family, and a future that almost slipped away. This story reminds us that the strongest people don't always fight with loud words. They keep showing up with steady hands when everyone else has given up. Elijah changed lives not because he demanded recognition, but because his actions quietly spoke long before anyone believed in him. Today, think about one place, one relationship, or one person you've almost given up on. Before you walk away, ask yourself what Elijah would have done, and maybe choose to stay just a little longer. Have you ever kept showing up for someone even when no one noticed? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if Elijah's journey stayed with you, there's another unforgettable story waiting for you in the next video. One that begins with another impossible promise.